We are live K-12 budget. Thank you guys for all being here today. We're going to take about 10 minutes with Norma Volkmer. She's with our research department, and she's going to go over our COVID federal funding at last. Welcome, Norma.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. And you should have with you two different documents, which I provided to the committee last week. Both are green. The first is your classic 8.5 by 11 entitled COVID-19 Federal Funds for K-12 Education. It's a memo. It's got KLRD at the top. And this just provides an overview of the three funding buckets that you see on the spreadsheet. So the first is the Coronavirus Relief Fund received by the state under the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES Act. $400 million of that was allocated to the counties. And I'll note on page 2 that right at the top, school districts and other K-12 education institutions received approximately $76.2 million of that. There was additional funding allocated to the Children's Cabinet, so it was $40 million for remote learning grants. And then, of course, the Department of Education collaborated with KDHE, which received $20 million for COVID testing for K-12 education institutions as part of the unified statewide testing effort. Those buckets are not included in that $400 million allocated to the county. Real quick, I'll note, and this is still on page 2 of that memo, of the $40 million allocated to the Children's Cabinet, $23.5 million was recouped. And so that original allocation was part of Spark Round 3, and the recoupment occurred in mid-November of 2020. And of the $16.5 million remaining, $8.5 million was awarded to 62 grantees as of January 21st, 2021. Still on page 2, that second bucket is the $84.5 million received directly by the Kansas Department of Education from the CARES Act. Of this, 90% has to be allocated to the local education agencies or school districts in Kansas. 0.5% may be used for administrative purposes, and the remainder may be used for any emergency needs of the state. And you do see there allocated the purposes for which those funds allocated may be used, starting on page 2, and it goes through page 3. This funding is available to be obligated through September 30th, 2022. And as of January 28th, 2021, $117.6 million under the CARES Act. So that's from both that county CRF as well as the $84.5 million received by the agency had been distributed to school districts and other K-12 education institutions. On page 4, you'll see the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or CRRSA. It was enacted on December 27, 2021. And under this act, the Department of Education will receive an additional approximately $369.2 million. Again, 90% of this must be allocated to school districts. 0.5% may be used for administrative purposes, and the remainder may be used for state-specific emergency needs. In addition to the 12 purposes noted under the CARES Act, there are 3 additional purposes which are outlined starting on page 4 and going to page 5. I apologize, the preliminary allocation was $369.8 million. $332.8 million of which would be that 90% that has to be allocated to the school districts. And this may be obligated through September 30th, 2023. Under both the CARES Act and CRRSA, there is a maintenance of effort from the states, which requires that state support for K-12 be maintained at the average level for fiscal year 2017 through fiscal year 2019. And that'll wrap up the memo portion. Moving on to the spreadsheet. You'll see first the county name, followed by the school district, followed by the student FTE for school year 2020. And then the total funding allocated via KSDE is the total funding allocated both under CRRSA and then the CARES Act. So that's a preliminary allocation under CRRSA. So then you see the KSDE CRRSA It was all allocated via that emergency relief and elementary secondary school fund. So you have the preliminary allocation. The following 6 columns are all the CARES Act funding, so that was broken into 2. First, you have the 90% that had to be allocated to school districts. So that's the allocated, drawn down, and then available. And the second half of those 6 columns is the remainder of that 9.5% that Department of Education could allocate towards any emergency need in the state. It was allocated towards special education. And so you have those breakdowns of, again, the allocated, the drawn down so far, and the available. And the remainder of the spreadsheet focuses on that coronavirus relief funds distributed to counties. I've received the total broken down by county earlier this afternoon, and I can update the spreadsheet and provide that to the committee tomorrow. So it does have the CRF broken down by county and then by school district. And I will note that some school districts receive funding from multiple counties. Those are the ones in italics on the spreadsheet. I can pause here for any questions.
Minnie, what questions do you have? I do have a question. As I'm looking through this and I'm looking at the explainer document that you provided, is there any one place that you have created a chart spreadsheet for the Department of Education? We know that they can get 0.5%, but it's hard to track how much money that they have specifically for programs that just are allocated through the Department of Education, not directed onward to the school districts.
Certainly, Madam Chair. So I don't have a chart. The 0.5% for that original CARES Act on page 2 is about $422,000. And that is for both fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021. So I will note the CARES Act funding is not all being distributed in fiscal year 2021. Some of it was distributed in fiscal year 2020. Including some of the administrative expenditures were in fiscal year 2020. And a little bit more detail is included during the budget presentation for the Department of Education on that. As for the preliminary allocation under CRISA, that I believe is approximately 1.8 million for administrative, and that's a permissible, so they don't have to use 0.5%. It's simply that they can only use up to 0.5%. So in theory, 90% has to be allocated to the school districts, but the remaining 10% could be used for a state-specific emergency need. It does not have to be allocated to administrative purposes.
So if we were to go through all of the breakdown that was provided here, would it show that they gave 90%, or would it show that they gave more than 90%? Or how can we know what the Department of Education is maintaining for administrative purposes or for other purposes?
Certainly. So under the CARES Act, on the spreadsheet, you have the CARES Act 6 columns. The first 3 are the 90% that had to be allocated to the school districts. So you'll see at the last page, the total was about 76.1 million in that first column. That is the funding of the 90% that must be allocated to local education agencies or school districts. For the special education, that 8 million that's allocated is essentially the remainder of the 10%. They did set aside the 0.5%, which was about 422,000 for administrative purposes under the CARES Act. At this time, per the agency, the allocation under CRISA is the 90% that must be allocated to school districts. So that's totaling about 332.8 million. The remainder, the agency has not determined if they'll use up to 0.5% for administrative purposes, or what the state-specific emergency use would be for the remainder of the funds. So at this time, that's understanding from the agency. They may be able to give you more detail on that.
Okay, thank you. Committee, other questions? All right, you may continue. Any other
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, that was all I had for the overview of the coronavirus relief fund.
Okay, so overall, we're looking at it between 550 and $580 million. That does not include the county monies. For example, in Sedgwick County, you could add another $5 million, or in Butler County, you could add another, probably $4 to $5 million for those school districts, which you're going to provide for us later this week in a new document.
Yeah, so I do have the county's allocation per the most recent Office of Recovery dashboard numbers. Those are from mid-January, and they would be through the December allocation. However, I have received the county totals broken down by school district, so I will be updating the spreadsheet and providing that information to the committee so that you can see what each county allocated to each school district in particular.
Okay, if there are no further questions, comments, things that you'd like Norma to look up for you. All right, thank you, Norma. All right, committee, so that concludes our review of our COVID money. It probably would be a good idea for you to look at your individual school districts and look and see how they are being compensated, how are they using those monies, and that would be something that would be helpful as we move forward on pretty much every topic here at K-12. So with that, committee, we are going to begin with House Bill 2119. And before we open the hearing on House Bill 2119, I would like for our reviser, Nick Myers, to provide an overview, which you should have received in your packet from Roger today. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, members of the committee. Okay, committee, House Bill 2119, as you know, would create the Student Empowerment Program. This program would authorize parents and guardians of eligible students to establish student savings accounts in the state treasury and use those accounts for certain educational related purposes that are listed in the bill. This program would be administered by the state treasurer. And I'll kind of get into the more of the details of the program now. So under House Bill 2119, the parent or guardian of an eligible student would be authorized to establish an account on behalf of a student. A parent could establish an account for each student or child of the parent. A student would be eligible for an account if the student qualifies for free or reduced price meals, has been identified by the school district as eligible to receive at-risk program services because of performance on the math or English language arts assessments, high rates of absenteeism, or for any other reason as identified as needing at-risk services. The student could be a student who has been required to attend school through remote learning for 120 consecutive school hours within the current or immediately preceding school year, or for 180 total hours within one calendar year. Likewise, if a student has been required to attend school through hybrid learning for 240 total school hours within the current or immediately preceding school year, or in one calendar year. And then also students who have already had accounts established on their behalf could maintain those accounts and continue in the program. So how this would work is school districts would be required to notify the parent of a student when a student becomes eligible for one of these accounts. The notice must include a description of the program, the reason why the student became eligible, a copy of the most recent assessments for that student, and some contact information relating to the program. So to establish a student empowerment account, the parent or legal guardian of the student would be required to enter an agreement with the state treasurer. This agreement would set out all the terms and conditions of participation in the program and how to use those accounts. As part of this agreement, the student would be required to either enroll in a qualified private school or to continue part-time enrollment in the student's resident school district while receiving additional educational services using those account monies. Enrollment, a section of the bill deems that enrollment into a qualified private school would be deemed a parental placement under IDEA. Also, a private school under this bill would be any accredited private school or homeschool registered with the State Board of Education or non-accredited private school. So what the monies could be used for in these accounts, parents could only use them for certain educational related expenses. And those are listed in the bill and my memo as well. So what the monies could be used for are tuition and fees charged by a qualified private school, textbooks and supplies required for a qualified private school, transportation fees, educational therapies or services provided by a licensed or accredited education provider, tutoring services provided by a certified tutor, curriculum materials, tuition and fees charged by an accredited private learning program, fees for nationally recognized norm referenced achievement tests, advanced placement examinations, or other examinations related to post-secondary admissions, contracted services from a school district, including certain classes, tuition and fees charged by a post-secondary educational institution, for this requirement, the student cannot have graduated high school or have obtained a GED to be eligible. So these tuition and fees would be for students taking classes while they still are in high school or going towards their GED. And then also any other educational expenses that are approved by the treasurer in rules and regulations could be authorized. So the amount of monies that are deposited or would be deposited into a student's account would be based on whether the student enrolls in a qualified private school or enrolls part-time in the school district. So a student who enrolls in a qualified private school would receive an amount equal to the base aid for the immediately preceding school year. And then a student who enrolls part-time would get an inverse amount of that base aid based on the amount of time that student is not in the public school. So these amounts would be annual transfers into a student empowerment account for as long as the student participates in the program. The treasurer would be required to annually certify the amounts of monies that are necessary to fund all accounts. And then upon certification, a demand transfer from the state general fund to the student empowerment fund would be made in each year. The treasurer would be authorized to keep a certain amount for administrative costs. So for newly established accounts, the treasurer in the bill would be authorized to deduct up to 5%. And then for accounts that have been established for 3 or more years, 2.5% for administrative costs. The treasurer would also be required to audit the program on an annual basis. And then if the treasurer determines that monies in an account were not expended appropriately, the treasurer could make the parent repay the expenses, could lock the account, or could prorate future deposits to make up for those ineligible expenses. The treasurer would also be required to approve of the qualified private schools in which a student can enroll, and those qualified private schools would need to file information with the treasurer and conduct annual audits of those schools. If a qualified private school does not comply with the program requirements, the treasurer can revoke that school's approval. The treasurer would also be required to provide an annual report on the program to the governor and to the legislature. And this report would be including information such as the number of participating students, where the students are enrolled, the number of qualified private schools, audit results, the total cost to administer the program. And then the treasurer, as I said, would be required under this bill to adopt rules and regulations to implement and administer this program. So for each eligible student who has participated in the program for less than 3 years, a resident school district would be able to maintain a certain funding amount for that student equal to that student's weightings. So the low enrollment weighting of that student, the high enrollment weighting, the bilingual weighting, and the at-risk student weighting and career technical education weighting for that student would be maintained by that school district for 3 years. Those weighted amounts would be certified by the State Board of Education, and then upon appropriation of those monies, That weighted amount for each student would be transferred from the state general fund to the state foundation aid account of the Department of Education, and then would be distributed through the school finance formula back to those school districts where the students were at. And that's all I have, Madam Chair, and I'd be happy to stand for committee questions.
Thank you, Nick. Committee, what questions do you have for Nick? All right. Yes, Representative Estes.
Could you please elaborate on how fees are defined in the bill?
Representative Estes, could you kind of clarify what fees you're talking about?
In general, there's a lot of places where we say people will be reimbursed for fees. Do we define fee? Because there are reasonable fees and unreasonable fees sometimes.
I might be able to comment on that. I know that, for example, in higher education, there are tuition and fees. And for many of those, for example, community colleges, they're one and the same. You have to pay a tuition rate, let's say it's $110 per hour, and you have to pay a fee rate that would be $35 an hour. So there may be some schools that are part of the program that, or private schools that have a fee cost, maybe it's an activities fee, and I don't believe puts a criteria or sets a criteria for what a fee is. If a school establishes a fee, then it's likely included, and an expense that would qualify.
Thank you.
Would that be correct, Nick?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. That's correct. And that tuition and fees language is typically language we use when referencing scholarships or programs like this.
Committee, other questions for the revisor? Representative Byer.
Nick, on the section where it talks about tuition services provided by a certified tutor, when we say certified, do we have a state statute that gives us some definition of what certifications actually are, or is that just language thrown in there?
I don't know about tutor certification enough to be able to speak on that. I don't believe there's a state statute relating to tutor certification, but I don't know enough about that certification process to provide information at this time to the committee. I can certainly look into it, though.
Well, I hope it wouldn't be a specific requirement for certification. I remember when my daughter was in high school and the school district actually hired her to be part of a program that encouraged kids to stay in school. ACEs, I think is the name of that program. And so she would tutor middle school students in math because she excelled in math. And so she certainly wasn't certified, but she certainly provided paid support to that middle school. Any other questions for Nick? Yes, Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure, can we ask like other questions during this time too? Like this might
So
be more
this is, no, this is not going to be a time for any type of judgmental kind of types of, well, we don't agree with this. What you're looking at is you're trying to understand from the reviser legal understanding of what does something mean. So if you're not sure of something's meaning, then he would ask him. If it's intent, you would not ask him.
Okay, well, I do have a question about, it's on page 6, new section 9, it's starting at line 40. Students have until August 1st to leave their school. Then schools have to know the size of their staff by May, and then districts have to post their budget for transparency. The school board needs to see it by August. So my question is, since they have to have their budgets built before they know if families are going to leave, does this cycle conflict with the school finance formula?
I don't believe that there's a direct conflict with the school finance formula. I see what you're saying with regard to the August 1 start date, but the way this would work is students would need to start being notified that they are eligible. And this law would take effect on July 1. And I don't know if in that 1 month time, if students would start being notified and if those accounts would be established by then.
I could also add that schools do estimates of the number of students when they create their budgets. Those aren't verified until September 20th, and then they can be even amended again, I believe, maybe in February. So also to note with that is that enrollment numbers for this year are applied next year. So anything that happens this year does not take into effect until next year, so there's room for revision. And then also to know, and Nick can explain it better than I can, but it's a 3-year kind of what's your high in enrollment. So not necessarily, is there any impact? Nick?
Yeah, certainly. And to that question, yes, kind of thinking ahead, if a student leaves a district and uses an account to go to a qualified private school, the school finance formula is a 1 year or 2 year delay. So it's always looking at the preceding counts of students. So it would take a year or two for that student who left the district to kind of fall off that school district's enrollment for funding purposes. The other thing, I guess, on that question is within that 1 month time, this is all going to be administered by the state treasurer. And the state treasurer is going to have to get up to speed. And there's probably going to be a time in there where the state treasurer is promulgating rules and regs and putting out guidance of how to use these accounts and the information sheets. So there's going to be some time that the state treasurer is going to need to get that ready to go. So this first year, it might have to kind of wait until the state treasurer gets all those rules and regs in place and gets the program running before this stuff starts happening.
Okay, so on that note, thinking of having, the startup and all of that, then when I look back on page 2, starting at line 18, when we start talking about what the definition of at-risk is and including remote and hybrid models from the last school year or 1 calendar year, currently, are there any students in Kansas who do not meet this criteria for at-risk?
So you are referring to one of the qualifier, not necessarily the at-risk qualifier, the qualifier of the remote learning and hybrid models. I'm not sure on that. I'm not sure how many total school term hours consecutively or within 1 calendar year every student has encountered. But we could certainly find that information if somebody doesn't provide that.
I can add on to that. So if it's the previous year and it's adopted in 2021 and registered, so then it would go back to 2020. I don't think that the intention was for it to include 2020, which would have been the spring of 2020, not the winter and spring of 2020, not the fall. So I can tell you that piece for you.
Oh, thank you. And if we could find that out for sure, whether, I understand maybe that's not the intent, but I would just like to have an understanding. The way I'm reading this makes it seem like, at least currently, this is considering all students right now in Kansas at risk.
Committee, other questions? Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, on the qualifications to make a student eligible, just for clarification's sake from my side, it says they qualify for free or reduced price meals, and then there's several other things. Are those and or ors? So like if they qualify for free and reduced price and they're identified at risk, or is it they qualify for or they have, or is it just simply they qualify or they've been attending for 120 consecutive hours, that type of thing?
Certainly. Good question. And those are ors. So in the bill on that page 2 and in subsection C of the definition of eligible student, a student could qualify for free or reduced price meals or have been identified as at risk, as needing at-risk educational services, or the hybrid or remote learning models, or already has an empowerment account established. So those are individual qualifiers and separate and distinct.
Thank you.
All right, committee, any further questions? All right, thank you, Nick. Stay close. I'm sure there may be other things you'll have to weigh in on. Committee, I have not formally opened hearing HB 2119 because we have heard the reviser's report first. And so I'm always a step ahead of where I want to be. I'm going to take a step backwards. Let's introduce bills. Today is the last day to introduce bills, so I hope you brought your RS numbers. So Representative Thomas?
Yes, Madam Chair, Bill number 21 RS 1128, a bill concerning the statutory requirement for school boards to negotiate with certain unions or groups.
All right. Without objection, we will request that bill introduction. Representative Tarwater?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few bills that I'd like to introduce. The first one is 21 RS 1011, and that is the Kansas Promise Scholarship Act. There was an error in the original drafting of the bill, so we're reintroducing that. Then 21 RS 0551, and that's work-based learning liability bill. And 21 RS 0560, and that is the employee organization dues opt-out bill. And then on behalf of the Blue Valley School District, 21 RS 0875, having to do with non-proficient pupil weightings. Thank you.
Committee, without objection, we will request those as bill introduction. Are there any other bill introduction requests? Online, remote? All right, good. We are officially out of that, and we will not be having any further bill introductions. All right, committee, now it's time for me to open the hearing on HB 2119, creating the Student Empowerment Act to provide an educational savings account for students who are academically at risk. We've had our reviser's overview, and so we will have approximately 7 proponent oral and 7 opponent oral testimony. In addition, committee, you did receive all of the testimony from Roger online, so you can pull that up at your convenience and follow along. If you did not get any of the testimony, we will forward that to you in case it was not included. In addition, committee, I want you to take note of the written-only testimony that you will find in your, or online. So be sure and take a look at that also at your convenience. Because the testimony was limited today, equally for both proponent and opponent, we are going to allow, Representative Hoffman will help me as timekeeper. We're going to allow 5 minutes for each individual to share their testimony, and then we will take questions from the committee after each section. So proponent will go first, then neutral, and then opponent. So with that, committee, we will go ahead and invite Pastor Wade Moore. Pastor Wade Moore, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
All right. Wade has shared testimony to our committee in the past, so welcome, Wade. You have 5 minutes. Thank you for
Thank you,
sharing.
Madam Chair. Thank you. I want to say good afternoon to Madam Chair Williams and the entire educational committee. Thank you for your time and your service. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you virtually. My name is Bishop Wade Moore, and I serve in a number of leadership roles here within the city of Wichita. I'm the senior pastor of Christian Faith Center, which is a multicultural congregation of 300 plus members. I also served as president of the Greater Wichita Ministerial League, representing over 40 churches in our city from various denominations and faiths. And I'm also the founder of the Urban Preparatory Academy. It's a private school here in Wichita that's dedicated to helping students who are struggling to keep pace with their peers in their educational journey. And we are located right in the heart of Northeast Wichita. We began the Urban Prep Academy in the fall of 2014, and we offer children in grades kindergarten through 8th grade an opportunity to attend a great school of choice. We have a very rigorous curriculum in math and reading. We assess every incoming student that's coming in from our public school system. Students are assessed in the beginning of the school year, at the end of each semester, monthly to see if they're making gains or if they need additional support from us. We've seen some great growth in their academics, and we have parents that testify of their child's attitude towards school, homework, and their social growth as well. And I want to say that I am in full support of House Bill 2119, and I believe that this bill will significantly improve the education of low-income and at-risk students who are tired of failing. And I believe it will certainly benefit the students I see daily in our school, our church, and our community. Since I started the school here, or since we begun this school year, and we know how the school year began for a lot of school districts here in the state of Kansas. When we started the school year, I see students daily from the public school hanging out here during school hours on our grounds. And I go out and I talk to students that are either walking the streets or they're physically on our grounds. And I know that they're school-age children. And I talk to them about the challenges they have right now with remote learning or a hybrid learning system. And it's really challenging kids. And a lot of kids are not even doing anything. They're not getting online. They're not going to school. They've just basically given up because they can't navigate it. They're having problems. They don't have internet. They don't have family to monitor them. And so it's been a real challenge for a lot of students. And it's causing a lot of pains. We see here in Wichita, we see crime continue to rise among youth here. And that's because they're out of school and those things. So when I ask them about it, and I'm speaking to them, and they'll ask, well, can I go to school here? And I said, well, we're a K-8 school, and you're a high schooler. And they asked me, is there any, can we create something, or will I open up a class with them to help them out? Because they really want to learn, and they don't want to be out in the streets, and they don't want to be just out there. During Christmas, again, children were able to go back to school for a while, but then just before Christmas, there was another shutdown. Overnight, my phone blew up, my social media blew up with parents that were concerned about the status of their children. They didn't know what they were going to do. They wanted to know if I could offer them any help, any assistance, and helping their children. Well, I'm limited with that because of the population that we serve are already low income, at-risk children that are K through 8. And so there's a lot of children that really need this type of assistance. And some kids I know that were good kids, but because of the state of things, they're falling way behind. As a matter
Pastor
of
Wade,
fact,
Pastor Wade, 5
yes,
minutes
ma'am.
goes way too fast. But I want to do this for every single person that's remote, provide the opportunity for some questions while you're here with us so you don't have to hang around with us. We do have your written testimony, and I know what you do and how you impact kids. I'm sorry that we ran out of time, but I want to open up the committee to ask you a few questions right now. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And I will ask each remote person that's providing testimony if you want to ask questions right now so that they can continue. I think he's at his school right now working. So,
Yes.
committee, are there questions for Pastor Wade? How many students do you serve again?
We're at 75.
75. And what's your official role at the school besides just founder?
I'm the dean of students. So
Dean
I
of
take care of the whole operations of the school and oversee the staff.
And did you run or operate your school the entire time in person during beginning in the fall, or did you have some on and off time?
Yes, we've been open since August 20th, in person since August 20th.
Okay. And didn't you have some summer school classes as well?
Yes, we started summer school in June. Did 8 weeks of summer school to help students that were affected by the pandemic, that were out of school, that needed some support during the summer.
I thought so. I took a tour there this summer, and I was very impressed by the kids that were there working hard in the middle of the summer. So that was pretty impressive. We do have a question from Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bishop Moore, could you just very quickly tell us about the financial pressures that the students and families have right there and how this particular bill might affect or impact that, be it positively or negatively?
Yes, sir. Well, we're a tuition-based school, but students are not able to pay tuition. We've been blessed where we haven't turned any family away because of financial hardship. We find a way to make it happen for them. I'd say we have 75 students. We have one student that is not on any type of tuition assistance.
Representative Estes.
Hello, Bishop Moore. Can you please tell me the impact it made in the lives of families to have their kids in school? Did that help them to keep their jobs and keep working and support their families?
Yes, ma'am. And that's another. Last year when we finished the school year, we were around 50 students. And this year we're at 75. And so what happened was it was families that needed to get back to work, single mothers, that was their only source of income. And they could not stay at home and help their children with remote learning. The hybrid model would not fit for them. So we've been able to help families that needed to get back to work by their children being here in person 5 days a week during school hours.
All right, committee, any further questions? Wade, thank you for being a rock star for kids in the Wichita community, and we hope to have more discussions with you in the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
All right, have a great day. You're
Thank you.
Dismissed.
Thank you.
Okay.
All
right. Joy Eakins, we had the pleasure of her providing testimony last week. She's a former USD 259 BOE member. Joy.
Hi, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you for a chance to speak today. I wish I could be in person, but with the weather and my schedule, I couldn't make it work. But yes, my name is Joy Eakins. I was elected to the Wichita Public School Board in 2013, where I served until my term ended in January of 2015. I'm also a parent, and anyone who knows me knows I volunteer as a tutor and mentor with organizations that serve at-risk students in my community. Last Thursday I spoke to you, and in my written testimony, I've included the article I spoke about as well as all relevant references, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have after having had time to look at that data. But today I want to talk about this bill. You know, my pastor tells us, church all the time, that when we find ourselves under intense pressure, that's when we're going to find out what's really going on inside of us, where we have strengths and where we show weaknesses. And the same is true for our systems. This last year, all of our systems have been under an inordinate amount of stress. And this has highlighted the fact that some school districts are built on what is right for kids and their families, but other districts may care for children, but children are not at the top of their priority list. Yes, there are caring adults inside all those systems. There are even caring adults who lead some of those systems, but sometimes their voices are muted and the system takes over. I want to talk to you. I've been talking about these issues with at-risk students since 2011, when I visited my first classroom with an at-risk child that my husband was mentoring, and realized that the system just saw this bright young man as, what they said in their own words, someone doomed to fail. It was heartbreaking. And so in 2013, when I ran for USC 259, I staunchly opposed measures like this bill. I believed we could bring change from the inside and fix these issues for our most vulnerable students. But now I'm here today asking you to pass this bill because I got a good look at the inside of the system and saw what many of the parents last week are also seeing. In the 4.5 years I sat on the board in Wichita, we had one meeting where student achievement data was brought for a discussion. The district reported that the results were encouraging until I pointed out in the meeting that in 5 of our high schools, 1 of every 2 students was below grade level in math. That was the last time we discussed state test results in a meeting. Instead, the board talked about the new school facilities we should build, how to maximize the mill levy authority on our citizens, lawsuits against the state for more money, and balancing the budget by cutting programs for at-risk high school students to save SEIU labor contracts. We did discuss education. We talked about new teaching practices we would impose on our highly educated and committed teaching staff, or lament the discipline crisis our teachers face without actually taking steps to solve the problem. And the board continues to make focus like this today. Since March of 2020, the Wichita School Board has taken public comments once when required by law, but the teachers union and SEIU have spoken at every meeting. And by the way, at that budget adoption meeting, instead of passing on the savings of the bond debt during an economically devastating time for our citizens, they used the opportunity to raise the LOB and in effect raise taxes on their citizens. The board voted to lock parents out of watching their children participate in all activities, even safer activities like cross country. And after that vote, one board member wondered if he would be allowed a pass to these same high school events where I could not watch my own child. He does not have a high school student. When fall decisions were made about allowing middle and high school students back in the building, the district told us they needed 9 weeks to decide whether to pivot from remote to hybrid. But in November, they decided on a Monday night that elementary students would be fully remote on Wednesday, giving families and teachers less than 48 hours to scramble for solutions. Many parents like me have options. Families with options can move to another district, hire tutors, homeschool, or send their child to a private school. And parents with options are taking them. Wichita Public Schools has seen declining enrollment for the last 5 school years, with a total decrease over 7% since 2016, the year the board decided to make the disastrous decisions to cut alternative high school programs and shorten the school calendar. But what about the rest of our families? How long do they have to wait for the system to get fixed? I've been waiting 10 years, and in that time, the student I worked with has left and moved on to another life. In Wichita, 76% of our students are from homes of poverty, families that have limited options. These are the same families that have lost their jobs or had their hours cut back in the shutdown of our economy. One way for them to escape this cycle is to see their children get a solid education that prepares them for the future from a system that values the child and their family as partners in the process. These families should have equal access to the options for their children. They should be treated like the important stakeholders they are. And that's why I've changed my mind. I think this is a good bill. I think this is a bill that our parents need. We need to help level the playing field for families. And I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Joy. And we are going to go ahead and take questions right now so that you can go about your day. And apologies for, butchering your name again. So I guess I'm just too phonetic there. Any questions for Joy? Joy, I will just ask one question. If you could do one thing to help kids, we'll use your school district, Wichita Public School, what would it be?
If I could give our children one option, it would be to let them get back into a school somewhere. We have, this year, my family and I, we serve at-risk students. We had a student who slipped through the cracks in the spring who's now homeless. And we've seen dropouts. We've seen children with mental health crises. And a lot of it has been driven by the fact that they're remote and they don't feel like they have an option. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I have an option. When I was growing up, I didn't have options. So I know what it's like to be that kid sitting in a cold room right now by themselves, trying to figure out how to get to the next level. In my case, I had a lot of caring adults around me in a school building, and this year our students don't have that.
And, I guess I will add on to this, the question, since I don't think I have any other committee questions, but I was just looking at Wichita numbers for reduced lunch and free lunch students, and I believe that it's over 50% of reduced and free lunch students in Wichita are in level 1. That means there are 4 levels. Level 1 and 2 would be considered what the U.S. or the Kansas Supreme Court said, not at grade level. That's how they reference that. So we have over 70% of students from your school district that are at risk, free and reduced, that are not at grade level. And so that, I find that really concerning. And I guess my question to you is, I've been asking districts, including my own school district where my kids go, what is your failure rate? That is something that our Department of Education collects at different times throughout the year. And that failure rate generally means if a student is failing at least one class. Do you have any idea? Has that been publicized for 259?
Wichita Public Schools has not published the failure rate this year, but I will tell you that this statistic you just quoted about the number of students in level 1, that's the same number that it's been since 2011 when I first addressed this. We've never really made any gains. And to me, as much time and effort as has been spent by as many people, when we're still not making gains, there are families, in the time since I've started talking about this, my own child has moved from elementary school and he's graduating this year. So I think about all the other kids in his class at the same time who've moved on, or they've gone, they're in middle school and high school now if they were starting in kindergarten that year, and they still haven't made an improvement.
Okay, thank you. We do have one other question, Representative Owsley, and then looks like Representative Penn.
Thank you.
Hey, Madam Chair. So on the school board situation, I'm curious of 2 things. One, being on the school board, I'm sure you understand a little bit about school finance law and the way it applies to the school district. Are you concerned at all about the constitutionality of this bill? And then also, I'm curious, why only one term when you were discovering, the ins and outs of your school district?
That's a great question. So I can't answer the constitutionality. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a legislator and I haven't studied it. I would assume that you would work on that. I ran one term. At the end of my first term, I decided not to run again for 2 reasons. Number one, I decided maybe I could do more work for the students of Wichita, Kansas, not being on the board. And secondly, my own son was entering high school. He has just been appointed to the Air Force Academy and he'll be leaving in June. And school board is a very hectic and busy time. And I really felt like I needed to invest in my own child and be present for him in the last 4 years he would be part of us. And he's my only child.
I appreciate that. Is the 259, is that a volunteer position as a school board member?
Well, all school board positions are volunteer, and that board position, because it's a large district, then sometimes it can take us 10 to 20 hours a week if you want to do it well.
And that's without the subcommittees or, leadership on the board and whatnot. I appreciate you recognizing that sacrifice that board members make.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Akins, thank you so much for your service to the community. Just a quick question. In your estimation and with your experience and background, would you say that this bill, for those of us who are pro-student, pro-family, pro-teacher, do you feel, or what are your thoughts, I should say, about whether or not it is in alignment or supported by the teaching profession from what you've seen, or the school board and those activists that are on the school board?
So I think you'll find that I am in the minority of most school boards, and that's where I stand. But happy to stand there because, frankly, my experience tells me that I need to be on the side of the students. And I'll say this last piece. This is one of the reasons why. So I also run a business here in Wichita. My husband runs a business. Between the two of us, one of us has run a business for the last 20 years. And one of the things we've learned is that we have to keep the people who work with us happy. We have to keep our staff happy, and we have to do good work for our clients. Does that mean it's always perfect and always succeed? No, but they need to feel like they're getting money out of or they're getting something out of their investment. And one of the things that I see with way that school dollars are used is that they're going to get the same amount of money every year, and there's no accountability. Where's the accountability? The person closest to the accountability is the family who has everything to lose. I mean, who loses in this situation? If a child does not get an education, the child and their family lose. They're the ones who lose, and yet they have no say. In many of these districts like ours, they have no say. And so they're just in this position where, you don't have to worry about customer service. That's one of the first things they told us when we moved to Wichita. Students are our customers. Well, your customer service isn't always very good with some of our kids who need the most help. And I just want to say, because I want to be really clear, there are incredible people that work inside of Wichita Public Schools and care for our kids. This is not about, there are administrators who care, there are teachers who care, there are paras. At every level, there are people who care immensely for children. And they know the system is broken too, because they deal with it as well.
All right, committee. Thank you so much, Joy. We appreciate your testimony. Committee, we're going to go on to our next, and we have Elizabeth Patton. She is in here in person from Americans for Prosperity. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Sorry, guys. All right, let's try this again. I'm Elizabeth Patton. I'm the State Director for Americans for Prosperity Kansas, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I'm here as the State Director for Americans for Prosperity, but I'm also here as a parent of four, and I'm here not only representing my activists today, but I'm here representing my friends, my parent colleagues. 3 of my kids are school age. My youngest is in preschool. And as a lot of you know, the last year has been incredibly difficult for teachers, for parents, and for kids. I think it genuinely highlighted for many families the differences in learning styles for their children, what worked for them, what didn't work for them, and as has already been testified, some of the inflection points of where we could make some improvements in our system. According to a recent study, 71% of families actually support ESAs. And that was nationwide, but we did an independent statewide survey of families from many different demographics in Kansas. Several thousand families participated, and over 51% of them said that they would like to be able to adjust their schooling method to better benefit their kids, especially under this highlight of last year, but they didn't feel like they could afford to do so. And a lot of those parents were the parents of what we're talking about today, which are some of those at-risk children. And so what we're talking about here is the recognition that options matter to families. Just as the previous conferee mentioned, this isn't about saying that teachers or administrators or schools aren't doing a good job. It's not an attack on that, but it is recognizing that, just like we hear all of the time within education conversations, that one-size-fits-all tests or one-size-fits-all programs or one-size-fits-all mandates, they don't make sense, which is exactly why we're here advocating for the opportunity for families to have options. I think you'll hear from a lot of folks that this solution that we have is not going to be feasible, or it's not to the benefit of kids, or anyway, I won't get into that. But we also hear all the time that decisions are best made on the local level, and we agree with that. But sometimes the local level are the families. And they're the ones most in tune with their kids or the kids they're responsible for, and how they can be best set up for success. Because I think we have a common goal here, and the common goal here is that regardless of zip code, regardless of circumstance, that every child receive the best education possible for them, and that they have the opportunity to rise. And that's what we're after. That's what we're after with this policy. No one wants to see any child who is academically at risk, and yet here we have this opportunity to have yet another step for some families to see their child have a door open when it has perpetually over time been closed for a lot of reasons. So again, here for the opportunity for families to have options, for there to be more solutions, not less, and for Kansas to join some other states who have seen student success and outcomes as a result. What's great about this opportunity is that the local school district is able to keep both short-run fixed costs and some reinvestable savings, and that parents get to choose then what's best for their student. And it may be remaining in the school that they're at, but at the end of the day, this policy allows for a win-win opportunity. And while there's no silver bullet here, it is significant and intentional policy changes, such as this one, that helps Kansas save lives by saving livelihoods, by empowering children to have the best education available for them, and we can make the difference in the lives of our students here in the state. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. And you are among three proponent conferees, so we will hold questioning for all three of you together at the end. So
good, thanks.
Wonderful. Do we have James Franco here from Kansas Policy Institute?
Yes.
Oh, he's remote. All right, welcome.
I am remote today. Thank you for being flexible and accommodating that remote. But again, with the weather, your staff, Roger, has been a blessing to the committee throughout the year. So thank you to him. Thank you to the committee for indulging me moving remote. My name is James Franco. I am the president of Kansas Policy Institute. You have my written remarks in front of you, but I will try to summarize and draw out a few different things. To start, just a little bit of background. Close to 40 years ago, when it was time for my brothers to attend school, my parents moved from Kansas City, Missouri to what was then a one high school district of Blue Valley. My mom would later teach in that district and other districts on the Kansas side, spending many years as a middle school special education teacher. And we should be proud of that. Several conferees already have talked about the dedication of our teachers, administrators, faculty members, janitors, regardless of their experience in the public school classrooms of this state. And that's important. It's why a lot of people move to this state. It's why a lot of people move around the state, is to take advantage of what they feel is the right option. But the simple truth is that not every family can afford that. In fact, too many of them cannot. They don't have any kind of a fundamental choice. We send kids to school in this country by and large based on their zip code. And if you can afford to live in a nicer home, or in even if it's not as nice necessarily, where you want to, then you can choose your education. But if you can't make that tax payment and property taxes, the value of the home, then you are effectively stuck. And we know that that is the case despite the best efforts, like I said, of all those kids in the class, or excuse me, all those teachers and faculty members helping our kids. just one of your colleagues last week was discussing how COVID has laid the idea of student achievement and underperformance bare this last year. State assessments show pretty flat achievement over time. We've heard testimony on that already. The National Assessment of Educational Progress shows pretty staggering achievement gaps between low-income kids and their higher-income peers. And even on the ACT, we also see flat college readiness exams as well. We have 500,000 kids roughly in Kansas public schools, and this is one of the only areas of life or governmental programs regardless, where we expect that one system to serve 500,000 individuals equally well. Despite problems in other programs, Pell Grants, Medicare, Medicaid, and a variety of others, we give the individual choice in where they will pursue what it is that they need to obtain, in this case, K-12 education. And we should be welcoming that, not turning our back to it. And we must gauge our schools based on what's happening in reality. And it's that achievement crisis that I mentioned a moment ago and is referenced in my written remarks. And everyone in this room, whether you're a proponent of this bill, whether you are behind the dais, an opponent of this bill, everybody is concerned, and their primary concern is of student achievement. The question is, what is the best way that we can go about increasing student achievement? And as a previous conferee said, there is no silver bullet. There is no magic wand that is going to change years, indeed decades worth of stagnating student achievement. And this program, should it become law, the Student Empowerment Act is not that magic wand either, but it is an opportunity that can matter to families around this state. And the point of education is not schools in and of themselves. It is the educational interests of the state, which means it's the kids. It is preparing the next generation of Kansans. And like I said at the beginning, the simple truth is that we have school choice in this state for the people who can afford it. But unfortunately, too many families cannot, and that has only been more the case through the COVID pandemic, shutdowns, and business and school interruptions. I urge you to pass HB 2119, and we'll stand for questions at your convenience. Thank you.
Well, I will offer you the same courtesy I have to all of our remote guests today, and that would be questions. Committee, do you have any questions for James? Yes, Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, I'm curious since we're talking about the ACT scores here in the testimony, do you think it's possible that when the state started offering that test for free for all juniors, that could have an impact on those scores?
Yes, absolutely it does. But then if you look back through the historical data that I have in my testimony, the 4 years previous, we've also seen a downward trend at that same time. So I think it is safe to say that when that participation rate jumped approximately 10%, those are kids who wouldn't have otherwise been taking the test as they would in years previous. But the trend, I think, is also illustrative of something that none of us would be proud of if it were our own children, and we would want to do everything we could to help them do better.
Representative Hoy, did you have any other questions? No. Committee, other questions? All right, I guess I'll just ask one question for you. You mentioned what's the best way to measure student success, and I would just look at all of these different criteria that we see in accreditation, whether it's kindergarten readiness or graduation rate or individual plans of studies or social emotional health. We also have performance assessments that aren't the 5 main criteria for accreditation. What do you find in your research are the best ways to measure student outcomes, student success, student learning?
Right. So I think it's important, just like you said, Madam Chair, that no one data point is going to be proof positive, but there are some that are better than others. And for us, it's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It is the best measure by which we can track apples to apples what's going on around the country. The test, for all intents and purposes, doesn't change. It's not the state assessment that changes periodically. and things of this nature. And what we've seen is that in the last roughly 2 decades, Kansas beat Florida on 6 of the 8 NAEP criteria, or excuse me, NAEP exams 20 years ago. And now that has been inverted to where they beat us in 6 out of those 8. And it's because in addition to a variety of other things, they have embraced school choice. Again, that is not to say that it is a magic wand, but it is to say when they focused on transparency and accountability and yes, indeed, choice, they've seen tremendous gains on one of the only ways to compare kids from across state lines.
And let me follow up on that. For those that aren't familiar with NAEP, NAEP is a sampling that is done throughout Kansas. Was that done 2019, 2020 when COVID hit?
I do not know, but I'm happy to get that for you, Madam Chair.
That'd be great. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, James. We appreciate your testimony. We are now moving on to our next. I'm sorry. Oh, Representative Owsley. James, if you haven't clicked off, I think Representative Owsley had his hand up and I did not see it.
Yeah, I'm still here. Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, James. Will you repeat the time frame again upon that Florida versus Kansas statement that you just made?
It was when we started taking the NAEP exam. I believe it was they started implementing their changes in 1998, and I believe that was from the 2003 test through today. And I'm happy.
What was the time span in which you claim it was inverted?
From 03 to 17. I'm happy to prepare that for you and get it to you as well, Representative.
I'd like to see that compared with other states also, because that's going to fall, right in line with the 08 recession, and then into some state policies that, have hurt public education in the state of Kansas thereout. So I would like to see that.
Absolutely. As the same time as those national recession would have been impacting Florida is the same, but I'm happy to pull that data for you, Representative.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. We are moving on. We have our next in-person guest, Bob Corkins, who has also been a visitor to our community, or our committee, not our community. Welcome.
My name is Bob Corkins, and today I'm representing the Frontier Peace Advisors. It's the state's Libertarian Lobbying Association in Kansas. And I think I'll start this by just cutting to the chase, because I think maybe the most valuable thing I can convey at this point relates to the fiscal note of the bill, which again is another atrocious example of trying to estimate the impact that this is going to have on the state budget, because it only looks at one half of the equation. If you look over the fiscal note, which, by the way, wasn't available at the time I had to turn my testimony in, I just found it online this morning, but that didn't help either. Because what they essentially do is just go through startup costs and annual fees that would be needed by the Treasurer's Office, which amount to about $10 million on an ongoing basis, $10 million a year. Then they provide for the $36 million that would be the base amount that would be appropriated to current private school students that avail themselves of the savings account. And the fiscal note estimates that at 36 million, or about 7,800 kids times the base. Then they say it costs another 217 million for kids that are currently in public school that would transition to private. And their estimate, I think, was about 10%. Could be less, but 10% was the high number. It's not 217 million more dollars that we have to spend for this bill, folks. Yes, I can grant you the 10 million for the annual maintenance costs, the 36 million for the kids that are already in private school, but the 217, we're paying for them already. Remember the aggregate numbers, more than $7 billion a year that we're spending on K-12. That translates to about $15,000 per student statewide. Now the state share of that is not the full $15,000. The state share is $10,173. And by the way, all these numbers are from the 2019-2020 school year, because they're final and official at this point. So if it's $10,173 is the state aid that we're giving to each student, then what this bill proposes is putting only a portion of that into these savings accounts, which at the time the base was $44.39. And if you take $44.39 off the aggregate $10,173 state aid, you still have a lot of money left over, folks. And even if you take into account the weighting factors, and this bill identifies 5 of them that would be used. I wasn't clear on one of them. It said at risk. The bill doesn't specify whether that includes high density at risk. I assumed it did, and I came up with the weighting factors translating into 36% more than the base amount. I think the fiscal note used a figure of 32% that those factors increase the base by. So even if you continue giving the school district that they depart from the value of those 5 weighting factors, which means they'll continue for 3 years to keep getting $1,600 per pupil, even though they're no longer educating the pupil, and you put $44.39 into the savings account, that's still a net savings to the state of more than $4,000 per kid. You are saving money with every person that takes advantage of this program. And it's a difference between not what this bill would have you believe, it's the 10 million and 36 million annualized amount, so 46 million, versus what you would save, which would be over 800 million if you assume, as the treasurer did, that 200,000 of them would take advantage of the program. A number of other things that I could point out with regard to this. So that's the biggest takeaway, please. But the criteria for eligibility. Look, I appreciate and certainly agree with the pedagogy that the younger a child is, the more crucial in-person education is, face-to-face learning and interaction. But this bill only would do that on a temporary basis. That is, if there was a particular school year in which they had to do hybrid or remote learning for more than 2 months. What about the year after that? You know, the way that the bill's crafted is that you have to annually requalify for the program. How many times is COVID going to hit us on down the road? But maybe it's a COVID variation, or maybe it's a natural disaster, or maybe it's a union strike. It's just, this bill is a very, very good start, and we wish it were available for all students. So I'm not going to quibble over the eligibility here, but thank you very much. We encourage your support for the bill, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I just realized that in New Hampshire, I saw this just today, that they have a universal ESA that their fiscal note said would be $350 million less. So I noticed also in our fiscal note, it was definitely one-sided and didn't provide the other side of the equation. So thank you for providing that information. We have Elizabeth and Bob, if I'm correct, are the only in-person testimony here today on the proponent. So with that, so that not to delay them and whatever else they may need to do today. Committee, what questions do you have for Elizabeth or Bob? You make it all very easy. Okay, Representative Tarwater.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Can you clarify one of your statements that you just made? Is it your interpretation of this bill that if a child qualifies under the time limit this year, that he would have to come back to a public school the following year, as long as?
That's the way I read it, sir. Maybe the revisor can clarify, but that was my that's what I took from it.
It was my understanding that once they were in this program, they could stay in the program. Is that correct, Madam Chair?
Yes, once they are in the program, they do get to stay in the program.
That's better.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, Ms. Patton and Mr. Corkins, you are free. Thank you for your testimony today. Next, we have online, we have Heidi Ramirez from Dodge City, and she's a parent. So Heidi, with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, Heidi, you're muted. Try.
Yes, I think I am unmuted now.
Can we turn up the volume? Go ahead and talk. I think we can hear you now.
Um, Good afternoon or evening, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Heidi Ramirez, and I am a parent of 6 kids. We are from Dodge City, Kansas, and we are here to support the Educational Savings Account. And I would like to thank you for the opportunity to share our story and how this would help our family um, and how this would greatly ease the difficulty of accessing educational opportunities for our kids. So why Catholic school or why private schools? Because we feel that it mirrors our family, it supports our family, faith, our cultural values, and we feel it's a safe environment for our kids. And we as parents, we want what's best for our kids. And I'm not saying, public schools is not good, but we just feel that a private school gives, because of the number of students, more one-on-one support. Catholic education has taught and continues to teach our kids to give back and build up their in our community. We have 2 young adults, 1 teenager, and our oldest one, Jocelyn, she is in her 2nd year as a business owner in the community. We have Sarah, and she began her school. She wants to be a social worker because she feels that she was born to help people, and I strongly believe that Catholic schools has helped us give them that inside their hearts, and that's very important for us. She has played volleyball outside the country. She's a athlete. Now she's learning how to play the guitar, and she wants to help teenagers as she sees that there's a big need in there too. We have our little Heidi. She's our teenage girl, and she also plays several sports. She qualified for a spelling bee finalist. And we have our little Carlos, 7 years old, and he wants to be a professional football player. So I do believe that Catholic faith has had a deep impact on their desire to help others, and the importance of them being here on earth as human beings, as sons and daughters of God. And I know that the return on this investment through educational safety will be great for our Kansas. Now, affording Catholic schools fit for our children has been very difficult. Our oldest girl started attending 1st grade, and so that's been 15 years. So we, at 15 years, my husband already had 2 eye surgeries, one in his hand, one in his knee, and so we don't know, we never know what's going to happen, and so sending them to Catholic school has been a big challenge for us, and so I started working as a secretary. There was a couple of years ago that we qualified for a grant for our little Carlos. And then now that I'm working, we qualified for one and we didn't qualify for the other, even though it's the same family, the same income. And so we feel that this bill will make us plan ahead
this particular year, we were unsure whether we were going to be able to send our kids to the same school we've been sending them for 15 years because of that situation. And so we feel that that will give us the stability, and we will feel better, and we will give more to our kids. Right now, my husband works in maintenance for the school district, and on top of that, he also does construction work. I am a secretary, and I have gotten state licenses, and I'm currently starting to get 2 more, so that we can provide more and being able to help on our kids' education, not only for Catholic school. Yes.
Heidi, you did great, and we have reached our 5 minutes. Would you mind taking questions?
No, not at all. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Committee, are there any questions for Heidi? All right, they're getting easy. Well, thank you for providing testimony about your experiences and your proponent position. Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you so much, Madam.
Committee, we have one more on our agenda today, and as you note from your daily agenda, it says that there was a change due to a death, and so we do not have an ed choice. Jason is not going to be here with us, but we do have Jonathan Butcher here. Jonathan, are you online?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you loud and clear. It's all
I'm
yours.
sorry, I think changed the volume, I think, for the last speaker. I didn't mean to surprise everyone. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jonathan Butcher, and I'm the Will Skillman Fellow in Education at the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. I know the written testimony that you have is from Jason Bedrick at Ed Choice, but as the chair mentioned, he had a family emergency, is not able to testify today. If you have any questions about his written comments, I'm happy to answer questions about those, of course. In the meantime, I'd like to offer a few comments on the accounts. Having conducted research on different state programs and also served on the Department of Education Advisory Committee in Arizona some years ago when the accounts were first created in that state. Beta propeller protein associated neurodegeneration, or BPAN, is a rare genetic disorder caused by mutation in a gene related to the body's production of protein. Researchers have documented less than 70 cases in medical research since it was first described in 2012. The National Institutes of Health say that the individuals with BPAN experience seizures and lose physical and intellectual functions over the years as their nervous system deteriorates. Libby Bradford, age 10, is one of those cases. Libby is confined to a wheelchair. She cannot talk and must use a device that follows her eye movements in order to communicate. By her first birthday, Libby was visiting 11 therapists each week, says her mom, Liz. In North Carolina, students like Libby, now age 10, are eligible for education savings accounts, flexible spending accounts that allow parents to customize their child's learning experience or choose a private school. Liz applied for an account for Libby, and she has done beautifully, Liz says. The children have embraced her. The school has embraced her, Liz says. For the first time ever, she is being taught. She had been written off. She's been given the opportunity to learn and absolutely embraced it, Liz told me. With an account, parents remove their child from an assigned public school, and the state deposits a portion of a child's funds from the state funding formula into a private account that parents use to buy education products and services for their children. Lawmakers in Arizona, Florida, Mississippi, and Tennessee have enacted similar proposals to what's before you today. As with the proposal, parents can buy textbooks and other learning materials, hire a personal tutor, find education therapies, pay private school tuition, and even pay for college classes, all with the resources already designated for a child in the state education formula. Very briefly, I'd like to cover 2 commonly asked questions on the accounts, and of course, I'm pleased to answer any questions about any questions you may have. So first, education savings accounts are a radical advancement in the area of transparency over traditional K-12 funding formulas. In existing account programs, such as those in Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina, Policymakers, taxpayers, and account holders know exactly how much is deposited in each account. In these states in particular, parents access their accounts via an online portal that provides access to the education products and services that are lawful for parents to purchase. Thus, they cannot physically use an account to buy something that is not allowed by the law. The only items available to them are those approved by the agency or scholarship organization overseeing the accounts. And the payment processing company or scholarship organization, in the case of Florida, approves each purchase. Even in the original system used in Arizona for the accounts, which is being phased out now, parents they formerly used restricted use debit cards that also could not be used except at vendors that had been approved for participation in the account system. The amount of funds used for purchases that were not approved by law was less than 1% of all the account funds dispersed to all account holders, according to auditors there in the state. Just as important, when financial fraud occurs in public school systems, it often goes on for years before it is caught by auditors or law enforcement. That is very common, and I'd be pleased to provide any research specific to that topic. Second, Parent Choice in Education has a consistent record of producing positive outcomes for students and their peers who remain in the traditional system. Using the most rigorous form of social science, called random assignment, 11 out of 17 students of private school choice programs find positive outcomes for the participating students. So of the 6 remaining studies, 3 found negative effects, but those studies by and large dealt with a program in Louisiana that has a distinct design limiting the choices of the parents who are participating and the operations of the schools that are enrolling students. 25 out of 27 studies of parent choice and its effects on students that remain in the traditional schools, so the peers of participating students, find positive effects for those peers of students using choice programs. Of the 2 remaining studies, 1 found no measurable effect. This is a profound record among social science research. Parent choice improves in graduation rates, results in higher levels of respect for the rights of others on civic matters, and results in lower levels of crime in areas, and is associated with lower levels of crime in areas with choice options, such as Charlotte, to name a few positive outcomes. Finally, surveys of parents using the accounts in Mississippi and Arizona have found high levels of satisfaction among parents, 90% or more, depending on the survey. In Arizona, one survey found high levels of satisfaction even among those who said they were highly satisfied with their child's previous school. Thank you for the time to provide this testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
You are perfectly timed. Thank you very much. Committee, what questions do you have for Jonathan? And Jonathan, thank you for subbing in here at the last minute today. All right, our committee's getting quiet. All right. Oh, hold on 1 minute. My assistant's making sure there are no hands up in the gallery. Committee, you do have, if we do not have your email, we will get that and disperse it to the committee. So if they have any questions, they can send that to you directly. Does that sound good?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you very much. All right, committee, please note that there are written testimonies in your email, so please take note of that. We do have Becky Elder at the corner, and she's also a written testimony and a constituent of Representative Huber. So thank you for being with us today. So if there are no individuals that I have met or missed from the proponent portion of our hearing, I will close that portion. And we are going on, we have a neutral written, but we do not have any neutral oral. Is that correct? All right. So in that case, we are going to move on to the opponent oral testimony section of our hearing, and I will open that. Committee will follow the same procedures or guidelines that we did initially, and that would be giving courtesy to someone remote to ask questions right away, and not the same courtesy to those that are in person. So I do apologize for that. We also had a request from Mary Sinclair from the PTA to go first, but I think that the time, she may not be with us. She is not with us. Is there someone substituting for her? Oh, well, okay, I don't know if it was a typo or if it is Mark. Okay, so maybe it is Mark. Was it Mary? Okay. I think she had a conflict at 4:30, so please note, I think it's Mary, but I think that may be a typo, I'm not sure. But please take a look at, yes, Roger just texted me, said that's a typo. So it's Mary Sinclair, and please take note of her testimony. It was meant to be oral, but we could not accommodate that by the time that she needed to leave at 4:30. So we'll go ahead and mark her off, but please take time to read that. We're going to go back to the very top. We have Megan Hemingway. She's a parent, and I'm not sure if she's online or if she's here.
I am online. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Megan Hemingway. I am a parent of 2 kids at Shawnee Mission School District School. I have, they're at Rising Star Elementary in Lenexa. And I thank you all for your time today. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the committee members for hearing my story. I just wanted to try to give you a picture of what it has been like for my children in the remote learning model. So I know people have had different experiences, but I just wanted to highlight a positive experience. I chose to keep my kids in the remote learning model for several reasons this year. So they are in that model the entire year. Safety was a concern, family safety, the safety of teachers' families, students and their families. We have, my mother-in-law lives across the street, and my children's 2 best friends have multi-generational families. So all of us chose to be remote or to go homeschool. I have a few friends who chose to homeschool this year with the intent of returning to the building as soon as possible. Which was always our intent too, but I wanted to make space for the people who needed to be in the building and who couldn't make that choice, and also for the teachers and the district to figure out how they were going to keep kids and teachers and staff safe and educated. So knowing what we know about this global pandemic, I am floored at the high quality of learning and academic support my kids have received, and witnessing the patience and the care and the concern that these teachers have with every student. There's 19 kids in my first graders class, and I think it changes a little bit sometimes, but 20 or a little bit more in my 5th graders class. And so these are teachers and principals and building staff who act like they have had many years teaching in a remote situation. I'm so grateful for what they've gotten, my children have gotten. And I don't support this bill because I don't think that in the middle of a global pandemic is the time to make a change about public education and how well it is helping our children. So my personal experience is that I have a kid in gifted education. So he was identified early as a kindergartner that he needed probably that special education, that IEP, to get him the challenges and the help that he needed. And he went through that, and he has a specialized learning program, a specialized learning plan. And now my first grader is going through the same process. So in a pandemic, in a remote classroom, he has gotten the same type of education. He's gotten the same the same services, is what I'm trying to say, as we got when we were not in a pandemic. So principals, social workers, school counselors, gifted teachers have all had one-on-one meetings with my one child to make sure that he is getting the education and excelling academically. Both my kids have tested this year in the 99th and 98th percentile for MAPS tests, DIBELS, all these testing measures they have. So neither has fallen. And I would have, even though I do have bright children, I would have not been surprised to see a slip there. And as far as their emotional well-being, I said to the school social worker, I'm a little bit concerned. We have some stuff going on besides the isolation of being a family that's remote educating. We have some stuff going on in our personal lives. And the social worker, without question, said, yes, I'll meet with your kids. So twice a week, each of my kids has an individual hangout time with the social worker, and she does logic puzzles, or she just chats about their day. They play games online. She asked my 5th grader to make an art project to be part of Kindness Week. And so as a remote family, we have been included with the school building, even though we technically are a remote school and we have a remote principal. Our principal has stated and has made every effort to include the remote families in that same school community. And we do have 1/3 of our building that is remote and chose to be remote even when we were given the opportunity to come back. So I know that it has served lots of families. I don't think anyone would be parenting or working or learning, teaching in a pandemic. And it's just, I don't know that we're looking for what's the best that there is, but what's the best we can do for kids right now. And I don't think that saying that public education doesn't work, I don't think this is the time to make that call or that evaluation. Let's see, I could talk about the people in our building over and over again and all the wonderful things they've done for my kids, but what I'm trying to do, yes. Is that it?
Go ahead. I want you to make a closing statement. We're a little bit over on time, but I want to give you time to ask you questions. But if you'd like to make a closing statement.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say this is raising our children and educating them is a collective responsibility that affects all of our futures as citizens. And I wanted to give you a picture of what one building is doing and how well they're doing with that in our state. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Megan, for your testimony. Glad your kids are doing well. Committee,
Thank you.
other questions for Megan? Megan, you mentioned a remote principal. Is that something different than the regular building principals?
So Shawnee Mission took the remote kids and it's like we're in a different pool. And so there's a principal who's in charge of the remote learners, and we have our own schedule. So it's different than the first grade or 5th grade classrooms in the building, but all the remote schools or all the remote classes are on the same schedule. But our principal made the choice, and I can't speak to other school buildings, but she made the choice to make sure that she was still checking in with our families, and that she worked very hard to keep our kids, our Rising Star kids, with Rising Star teachers as much as possible to give them that continuity and that sense of community.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions, committee? All right. Thank you, Megan, for joining us. And we are to our next conversary, and it's Mark Tallman. Oh, there he is. He's hiding. Welcome.
All too easy for me to hide behind someone at my height. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, very much. I know it's getting late, so I'll try to move quickly and see whether there's any time you could have. You know, much of the concerns that we would express are those that we expressed a week or so ago on the same bill, so I thought I might briefly just let you kind of compare a little bit the two as you're making this. You know, we had concerns in the scholarship expansion bill of expansion of access. Notable in this bill is it includes both free and reduced lunch kids, which is about 45% of kids in public schools, plus students identified as at risk, which would add on top of that because we know there are non-low income kids eligible. And then, and I think you had some discussion about this, how you would calculate, I guess, the time limits on students who've been in remote learning. Because it would appear to us if this went immediately into effect, basically every child in the state will qualify. Now, I've heard discussion that wasn't the intent. We would suggest that's something you need to clarify if that is going to be the case. What is the time frame you're talking about? We also expressed concerns about accountability, and we just note under this bill it was explained it would include far beyond accredited schools by the state or accredited by anybody to include really any private school, including homeschools, that don't have to report data on such things as performance. So you'd be putting dollars into accounts in many cases where there would not be a way to trace how the students were doing. We think you should consider that. We've talked to you before about our concern that this would kind of dilute the dollars potentially available for high-need students. And again, although this bill in the title talks about aiding students who are academically at risk, that's not the requirement. If you are simply eligible for free or reduced lunch, you would be eligible. If you were in a hybrid learning environment for a period of time, you would be eligible. And cost, we certainly could talk about. I think our point would only be that if, as we understand the bill, you are going to allow districts to use previous enrollment and keep part of their weightings and put money into these accounts, you would have a fairly high fiscal note, at least at the beginning, to take into account before potentially there would be savings down the road. It's also important to remember that out of the per pupil savings or the per pupil state aid, not all of that follows an individual student. And so if a student moved to a different system, that's not going to change what a district would get for, say, capital outlay aid or bonds and interest aid or CAPERS aid or even special education aid. So it's important to consider that as well. Last thing I want to do is just, and I'm only going to reference you the information, you can ask me more questions about it. We wanted to see how Kansas compares to states that are actively involved in these programs. So I've got a chart showing that, and now, Madam Chair, I understand what you mean about fuzzy numbers. So I have sent to Roger a spreadsheet which, unlike my attachment, I hope would be legible so that you could compare how other states that are active in these programs if you want to look on a specific state-by-state basis. And finally, one of the things I think that concerns us a lot is sometimes we talk about the issue and throw around, and everyone does, failing schools. What we would suggest is those schools that have the highest number of high needs, kids that are not doing well, are the districts that have the highest needs of special need kids, of high poverty special education kids. That's where they're concentrated. And I would only say, because I think everyone before me has spoken eloquently of the need of this. I believe they're sincere. I know we want to help students. But here's our concern. We need to make sure that in a bill that would try to move some kids into what might be a better environment, we don't undermine the system left for those that won't have that other option. And that's our deepest concern. That in a bill like this, where there is no requirement for schools to focus on any particular types of kids, the most challenging, the most difficult behavioral problems, the deepest special ed need kids are the ones who will be left in the K-12 system. And then when we look at those results, do we call those failing schools because they continue to have and try to serve those kids? So if you have questions at the time about some of the research I have, I'll be happy to answer with the committee or individually. And thank you for your time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark and I met on the staircase, and he knows I definitely have some questions. And so thank you for your patience. We'll put you back at the end and go through some questions. And Mary Sinclair is back online. And so, Mary, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, committee members, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. I appreciate having the opportunity to raise our concerns on behalf of the Kansas PTA. And I'll just try to be brief and hit kind of four major concerns that we've identified or noted in written testimony. One is the concern around eligibility. That public dollars for private schools are no longer limited to at-risk students under this bill. The proposed savings accounts could be used instead by private schools to recruit high-performing students and promising athletes. And I use the word could because it's not I'm not saying they all will, but the opportunity is there, and there really is no incentive for targeting the lowest performing schools or students living in poverty. Second, the issue is around choice. And I think Kansas PTA values the choice that our state provides. And the reality of voucher programs is that it creates choice for all private schools, but not for all parents. Both admissions and permission for a student to remain enrolled are at the discretion of the non-public school. In other words, public schools are required to accommodate for the needs of all learners, while students are expected to adjust to the expectations of the private schools if they want to stay. The third issue that we have with this bill is around accountability. So under the savings account, essentially all requirements, accreditation requirements are waived. It's I think what I understand is that the qualified private school is really any accredited school or non-accredited private school. And for the state board, that alternative accreditation, if I understand correctly, really is just about putting your name and address down with the State Board of Education. The private schools are not required to provide, and I believe this was mentioned previously, any aggregated report on students who receive public dollars, how they're performing, how those public dollars were used. If we use the tax credit scholarship program, for example, since 2014, over 2,100 Kansas students participated in the tax credit scholarship program, but no program report on student impact has ever been published. These students could be doing worse. As a parent, we don't know. And multiple studies of voucher programs in other states have shown a lack of improvement in educational achievement among similar peers who are participating in the voucher program. There is also, numerous reports of financial improprieties, and I would hope that Kansas would be looking at oversight, particularly for the nonprofit authorizing entities where most of that misappropriation of funds happens. The final issue is about equity, and private schools may, but are not required to meet the learning and behavioral needs of all who apply. Private schools, for example, can require parents to waive their rights to the IEP as a function of admissions. It's stated online on page 10, lines 1 through 3. Further, private schools that adopt non-discrimination admissions policies are not required to extend those practices to retention. And I do want to call back to your attention to Mr. Westcott's comments last month in committee. I provided a quote in the link to that committee hearing, but he talked about how there are times when students maturate up through high school. If they don't start passing classes, they're not going to graduate from our schools. So we transition those kids out to different schools because they're not meeting requirements. So of course, those private schools will have better outcomes if they're transitioning out the kids that are failing. And that's not what public schools do. So if we're going to use public dollars, I think there needs to be a commitment to stay with those kids. Another piece of this grant seems to me that if we were to scale up the expenses for many of the authorized use of funds, would make it accessible and equitable to all students enrolled at public schools would be incredibly cost prohibitive. Just even looking at the fact that these dollars can be used in a way public schools can't, for private online tuition, student fees, bus fees, tutoring, educational therapies, fees for college entrance exams like ACT, SAT, AP test IB, tuition for dual post-secondary credit. I mean, that just would be incredibly expensive to make that accessible to all public school students. So in closing, as parents and taxpayers, it seems that the best course of action is to strengthen and expand our schools that welcome all Kansas youth, and regardless of voucher programs, we'll continue to educate the vast majority of Kansas students. Let's expand access to quality early learning and pre-K programs. Let's remain committed to restoring constitutionally adequate funding to the school finance formula. The Kansas Legislature still has 2.5 years from fully phasing in adequate funding under the Gannon Supreme Court agreement. Let's avoid spending public tax dollars on programs that are not required to provide safeguards for all students and accountability. Taxpayers and parents deserve full academic and financial accountability, and our students deserve schools that serve all children. Thank you.
Great, Mary, thank you. Your timing's perfect. Was Lori Denui the complimentary testimony for yours, do you know, from PTA? It was just the note I received. Don't worry about it if you're not aware. We received a PTA, Every Child One Voice, from Laura Denui. Maybe that's written only and not related.
Some of the individual schools, like you heard just previously, submitted. I was speaking on behalf of the State Board of State Board of PTA.
Okay, all right, well, good. Thank you for your testimony. Committee, what questions do we have? Any questions for Mary? All right, Mary, happy that we were able to get you on.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
All right, next we have Erin Gould, member of the Game On Kansas School. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of our group. And I'll try to keep my remarks short since Mark and Mary were so incredibly eloquent. But the members of Game On oppose House Bill 2119 for multiple reasons, and we'd like an opportunity to share them. First, this bill purports to be, at least in part, a response to concerns about remote learning. But should it pass, it would not be implemented for several months, and at which point the need for remote and hybrid learning will be greatly diminished, if not eliminated. Second, the eligibility criteria for this program is so broad, as we understand it, that it would include nearly all Kansas students, including students who are not actually academically at risk, and students who have been in person for months, as well as children who are already in private schools when the pandemic began. And we're concerned that without an explicit requirement by the state to accept specific student groups, this bill also leaves open the possibility that private schools will choose students who are easier and less expensive to teach and leave the most challenging students to our public schools. Third, we oppose this bill because it gives state funds to private schools that are not held to the same fiscal or academic standards as our public schools. While this bill requires private elementary schools to teach the same subjects as those required of accredited and public schools, it only requires secondary schools to teach history and government, and does not require them to teach English, math, science, social studies, foreign language, or PE. The lack of clear academic standards also means that participating schools are not required to be accredited, hire certified teachers, use a standard curriculum, provide transportation or lunch, or ensure students' IEPs are honored. This bill does not require private schools to accept all students, regardless of religion, sexual orientation, academic standing, or behavioral issues. And this bill does not require the private schools to accept students that are unable to pay tuition beyond the amount of their ESA. It doesn't require them to participate in standardized testing, and nor does it track or report the academic progress of the students using ESAs. So we believe that if this program is about helping at-risk children or children in general, it should provide safeguards that the ESA funds that pay for an education at least as strong as that provided by their local public schools, and that it should impose measures of accountability on private schools. And as with academic accountability, we believe there should be clear financial accountability, and that this bill should insist upon a level of fiscal transparency commensurate with the standards used for public schools. And we understand that there are some great private schools that provide adequate education services. But when proposing education legislation, we must focus on what is required rather than what some schools may do. And when it comes to this bill, we're concerned because almost nothing is required. And so we're going to urge you to vote no. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Erin. Committee, what questions do you have for Erin today? All right, looks like you get off easy. Have a great day. Thank you for your testimony. Next we have Stephanie Knows. You get used to it, huh? Okay, well, thank you for being here. She's a parent from USD 345.
As a former teacher and a parent of 8 children, my husband and I sincerely want to thank you for your service, especially this long day. We appreciate you. Madam Chairman and committee members, we thank you for allowing a few moments for me to stand before you and share a little bit about my family and how this bill will negatively affect families just like mine. My name is Stephanie Knows. I went to private schools here in Topeka. I taught at private schools, and I sent my children to private schools. I understand the benefits private schools can offer certain families, just not all families. When I was pregnant, I found out I was a carrier of Fragile X syndrome, which causes severe learning delays and autism. When our children with special needs began their schooling, we quickly learned that private schools could not and would not meet their needs. We made the decision to move to USD 345 Seaman School District for their special needs program. If funding is taken away from the public schools and given to private schools, how are we going to meet the needs of the students that private schools do not serve? Where are we supposed to go? If we are looking for equality in education, is education only for the able minds and bodies or for all? And I believe it's for all. So when you're discussing this bill, I hope that you'll remember that this bill is not offering a choice for Kansas families. That choice has always been there for certain families. This bill takes away from those of us who do not and did not have a choice. If we want our children's needs, all of our children's needs to be met, public schools are and have been our only option, and they should be adequately funded to help meet the needs of all students. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. And you are in person, so I will put you over there with Mark, and we'll take questions at the end of our committee hearing today.
Thank you, Madam.
You are welcome. Charles Steffes, board member and parent of USD 252. Charles, are you with us? Okay, welcome.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to share my perspective on HB 2119. I come here with my opinion as a parent, not necessarily as a board member. Our school district is located in southern Lyon County, serving approximately 538 students, K through 12. Our rural school district is a consolidated district. We have 4 buildings in 3 communities. I'm the at-large, so a lot of adventure in that position. We range in the previous years, we've ranged for anywhere from 15 to 75% free and reduced lunch in our schools. We also have a very diverse enrollment where we're at. We're located in a small rural Kansas town, but I can say that we're a very well-rounded example of a standard school. I joined our Unified School District Board just prior to the 2009 recession. Took over an outgoing board member's position midterm, right in time for the recession. And so I know what goes on in school districts when we're struggling financially. I've always seen the good years and the bad. So now comes on COVID-19 pandemic. It's a situation that could have destroyed us as a public school unified district, but has brought us together. Our communities do what is best for our future generations. Our communities are extremely proud of our accomplishments, of our students and our communities, the staff, and everybody that works together to make these accomplishments. Even through these challenging times, the board has pulled together. We've shifted money wherever we needed to meet the budget, to make things work, which is, again, very difficult during the COVID-19 pandemic with the remote learning options. Do we want to be in school? We believe that we want the kids in school. Now, that's where they learn the best, is face-to-face. And so we've done a lot. And our administrators have gone above and beyond to make that happen. And we've been successful at it. As with all things in life, there's a price for valuable accomplishments. Funding is needed to be able to make these things happen. HB 2119 is a short and long-term liability for the public school systems. At first, families will see this as a viable option and experiment with the private, teaching them at home. I'm a board member. I am not an educator. I am not able to teach my children adequately at home, as most parents are. That's why we have educators, we have professionals that do this. Unfortunately, when these experiments fail, the students are going to revert back to the public school system. This is going to place a huge burden, and it's going to be placed on the student themselves, their peers, the teachers, the administrators, the communities. Everybody is going to be placed with that burden. Funding and resources would be better suited to enhancing the public school system. would like to discuss two personal experiences. First experience involves, I have a small business in our town. It's a mini storage business. So mini storage, small units, 5 by 10, 10 by 10, 10 by 20, 20 by 20 size units. No air conditioning, no heat, no electricity, no nothing. It's a garage door that opens up and down. True story. I had a guy call me and want to know how much my units were. At that time, I had a couple of the larger units open. I gave him the pricing, gave him the size. He's like, okay, well, I'm looking for something a little smaller. Well, okay, what are you needing? Are you needing to move in the house? Are you moving an apartment? I was trying to help him out. I was like, what size does he actually need? He goes, well, I want to set up a school to homeschool my kids in a storage unit. I immediately did this, going to cost myself money. I refused to rent him a unit after he said that. I was like, nope, I will not rent to you. That is not a place to educate a child. That is the mentality that is out there. There are people out there that are going to do that. This bill will help support that, and that's why I stand opposed to it. The second example is a little more closer to home. This involves my oldest son, struggled with learning at an early age. I have 3 kids, 22-year-old, 17-year-old, 13-year-old. So 22-year-old, when he was young, identified that he had learning disabilities. Was it ADHD? Didn't know what it was. So we looked at it and we decided to enroll him in a private school, thinking, okay, smaller teacher-student ratio, got to be better. He'll get the attention that he needs to work through this. We helped him at home, but he was unable to do that. So the private school could not identify that. We moved him to the private school or to the public school. They quickly identified that and helped us work through the resources to do that. I'm sorry I went over my time.
Just, if you could just wrap it up in 30 seconds, that'd be great.
Okay. As previously stated, many private, religious, and homeschools do not have the resources to identify the accommodations for these students with unique needs. Granted, there are always exceptions. There are some that are very successful and that will work. I believe that's the few, not the many. So remember, whenever they start at home and they have these struggles, they're going back into the public school system when they're not successful. And that's going to put that burden back on them. The public school system is a proven and reliable source when properly funded to give our children the best chance for success. Let's do that rather than HB 2119. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Charles. We appreciate your testimony, and you're in person, so I'm going to put you with the in-person group, and we'll take questions at that time. So thank you. All right, we have our last individual, Kim Brown. She's a parent and board member of Piper School District. Is Kim with us or remote?
Hello.
All right, Kim, we can hear you. You have the 5-minute floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I would love to have been there in person, but Mother Nature was not in our favor today. So I appreciate you letting us virtually chime in. Also, please, just to set the expectations, we are running into a board meeting, so I may have to excuse myself right after. Wanted to share that. My husband and I have 5 children, all with different abilities, lanes of excellence, and passions. And I'm grateful that the public school system embraced and supported each of them equitably to thrive in their own lanes and become a valuable contributor to society. We stand in opposition of HB 2119. This is a license to break down the public school system and replace it with an every student for themselves mentality that I believe will inevitably create more division in our society than what already exists today in this very broken world. If we've learned anything from the pandemic, it's that the local community is more important now than ever before. In Piper, we have a very diverse student population with a variety of economic scenarios. Some families impacted more than others over this last year, but what I witnessed firsthand is that regardless of a student's gender, race, national origin, identity, or class rank, it was our village, neighbors, tribe, or whatever parents chose to hashtag on social media as their people It was the local community and our public schools that helped breathe life back into our students during these unprecedented times. I just want to remind everyone that this isn't about a choice we should be making because of the pandemic, or really any situation based about one specific school district. This is about the long-term effects and the significant impact to our society that we will experience years from now that would come from implementing a system that allows public funds to support private institutions that currently do not have any accountability or checks and balances for fiscal transparency, staffing responsibility, or academic standards. I strongly believe that pandemic or not, public dollars should never go to schools that do not accept all students. Public schools have honestly been the only equitable cornerstone of our community for generations. And I'm sure you all can relate at some point, thinking back, whether you were picked first in PE class or last, you knew you were going to make the team and you belonged to something before the selections even started. I implore you, please do not open the door with this bill for a pathway that makes it easier and earlier for our children to get thrust into an extremely competitive market for their education. Because we all know certain children will be cherry-picked and others will get left behind. Instead, collaborate with your colleagues and help find new and creative ways to use this precious public funding to make the public schools even stronger. And let's unify from within the walls that are the long-standing heartbeat of every community in Kansas. And let's ensure an equitable education for all to give us hope and help us heal as a people. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kim. Committee questions for Kim? All right, they're kind of quiet today, so thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, we will go back to our in-person converies. So if there are any questions for Mark or Stephanie or Charles, just raise your hand. Representative Johnson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Question on the issue on less accountability on the accreditation issue. It's been brought up, mentioned by several people, challenging.
Are you going to direct this to anyone in particular or open?
Mark.
Okay, Mark.
I'll go with Mark, because this is from his notes, I'm sorry. The concept, it says, required by the current text program to be state accredited. Do you say that that doesn't involve valid national accreditation systems?
I'm not entirely sure I understand your question. The point I was trying to make under this is, as opposed to the current tax credit scholarship, where you do have to be either state accredited or accredited by some national or regional body, as we understand this bill, you are not required to be accredited by anyone. So that I was making a distinction between what this bill would allow and what the current program.
That's a valid point for me to check on. Thank you. That's my question.
Committee, other questions? Yes, and please just identify who you would like to direct your question.
I'd like to talk to Mark briefly. Mark, as I was reading through the fiscal note, on a couple of different cases, they took a stab at how many students would take advantage of this program. At one point, it said 200,000, and at another point, it said almost 50,000. What are you considering would be the number of students that enroll in this program, given your research in other states?
Well, the one example you might look at is that in my testimony, I have a chart that looks like this. It's on about page 4 or 5. This is from Ed Choice, which was one of the organizations that testified, and it shows, I've just given you the selection of the top 10 states by percent. According to this, Arizona, of the total school population, 5.4% of the school population is in this program. Now, I don't know whether Arizona's programs would be as wide open. You know, I don't know what their eligibility is. That would be something you could obviously look at. That seems to be the high. These 10 states are all above 1%. There are other states, I think you've heard Mississippi, others, and this would include, and I'm sorry, what this calls the Ed Choice Share, they define as either education savings accounts, tax credits, or vouchers. So Kansas is listed in this table if you scroll further down, which you obviously can't on my page, but I've given you the link. They're like at less than 0.1%. So I guess this just gives you what's out there. I don't know what to estimate, frankly. I tend to think most kids and families are pretty happy with their public school system, and I don't think there's a lot of dissatisfaction, but it's really hard to know. But this would just give you kind of a ballpark of some states which have gone farther than Kansas, the numbers they're potentially talking about.
Okay, so in a program like Arizona's, it's been around for 10 years, and Florida's been around for 6 years. There's less than half of, you know, our estimates were 10%. I don't know where the 200,000 came from, but that would be an ungodly number. So, I mean, it's ridiculous to even consider, but it just doesn't seem to make sense. Like the numbers seem to be way blown out of proportion, and I would expect maybe if we were more in line with these other states, we'd be about 2,800 students after several years in the program. So I guess my next question is, you know, I was just going through your legislative priorities on your KSB website, and it's 6 pages long, most of which is about funding, and just funding. Then there is a small section on one page that's 3 bullet points long on students and what you would want for them. And so I guess my question is, would you agree that reduced class size would be a positive for students? It's not addressed in your list of items.
I think there is evidence that says it can be. It isn't always, but I think there is evidence that suggests it is positive. I think most of our members would like to try to do that.
And then if we were to reduce class sizes and school sizes in order to better help the kids that are in the public schools, that would also, being that the schools would be able to keep the weightings, and they also would be able to, you know, they get funding from, you know, all over the place, property taxes and all that. So the per pupil funding, overall funding would certainly increase, right?
Okay, Madam Chair, I want to make sure I understand the question. I don't know if I can agree with that. I think you'd have to look at how it would play out over time, because you're right, and I think a positive of this bill is by keep the weightings, there is kind of a phase out. There's a certain hold harmless. Those dollars would eventually, though, go away. You would, under the bill, be able to count the prior year, the year before's enrollment, but eventually that would potentially catch up. The issue of smaller class size, I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, there would be fewer students, but eventually, because we have an enrollment-based system, you would also lose funding for those kids, and so you wouldn't have the same amount of dollars to hire that teacher to keep the class size at that level. So I think that's the concern, is that over time, may not happen immediately, but if you have fewer resources in the system, the net of what we spend would go down. Now, the legislature could decide to say, okay, we will do the math, we'll net it out, there's still savings to the state, and we'll put those back in. That's possible, but I don't think the bill as it is now would guarantee that that would happen.
So going back to our previous discussion, if there's less than 1% of students, or around 1% of students that move out of due to this program, I hardly agree that we would have to get rid of teachers, but we would have lower class sizes. And then if, like, for example, Blue Valley High School spends approximately between 17 and 18,000 per pupil. This would take, what is it, $5,000 away from that, $1,000 away from that. And so my argument would then be that less students, they still get to keep all the other avenues of funding. It would just seem that the per pupil funding would actually increase when you look at the whole ball of wax.
I can see scenarios where it might, because if, for example, you've got like fixed costs associated with buildings, and you had fewer kids and you were still paying those building costs, for example, then the per pupil amount might go up. So I'm not trying to say it couldn't. I think it would be highly localized, and you'd want to, my advice, you'd want to look at kind of different scenarios that might play out over time. And I think, again, the concern is, to some extent, the unknown. If the guarantee is that if this program would cause a transfer of 1,000 kids statewide, if that's what we're talking about, I don't think you would have a lot of concern. I think the concern is that if it is seen as something that would be a much larger potential impact, that's where the concern would be. And as it is now, there's really no, unlike, the scholarship bill, where there's a cap on the state contribution, there isn't any cap on this.
Right, but given our previous discussion, we're not expecting the 10% number that everybody's talking about. We're talking much less than 1%. And so we might be closer to the $1,000 or 1,000 pupil mark that you said wouldn't be an issue.
Well, I guess if that would be the case, one thing you could do, I hate to tell you how to improve the bill, but I suppose if you put a limit on that said the state will, fund up to this level, see what happens, monitor those, that would reduce, I think, some of the concerns that people have now where we really don't know.
If there was a cap, would you support this bill?
I do not have authority for my membership now to support this bill.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
That's why I'm always reluctant to offer suggestions.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my question would be for the first in-person conferee.
I believe that would be Stephanie. Is that who you mean?
Yes, Stephanie.
Stephanie, if you would come back to, or you can sit there, you can turn on the microphone. Okay. And just be sure to hit the button.
So in your testimony, you described, your child's education experience trying to get into the Catholic school. And we've had conversations on this committee regarding, or you didn't say Catholic school, I apologize, private school. And we've had conversations in this committee on private schools not accepting children based upon their educational needs due to a developmental disability. Can you describe to us a little bit more about your experience? Did they deny you? Did you guys come to the mutual agreement that this wasn't a good fit?
Oh, absolutely. Here was a situation. My kids were in private school, and yes, it was Catholic. 8 kids, what do you think? And so I had, and she was one of my higher functioning special needs children. She was going to need a personal para. And they said, well, we just can't do that. And she said, we only have 1 para per classroom. So my child ended up going to a public school where there was 1 para for 4 classrooms. So I wrote the superintendent and the principal, and I quoted the Disabilities Act in different areas they were violating, and this was my response. And this is why we need specifics on private schools. They said because they're privately funded and because they're a private school, they do not have to adhere to the rights and responsibilities of the Disabilities Act. So if we give this funding, they want their funding, but they can deny students. And just like some of the others were nailing, they get sent right back to the public schools. And that was my higher functioning child. The lower functioning, my only son, we have 7 girls and 1 boy. He cannot speak, and he's 10 years old, and he's in a diaper. They have no diaper changing facilities for a 10-year-old boy. And so because they don't have the facilities and they have the right to handpick, cherry pick their students, because I've been there and I've taught there, he was not allowed admission into their school. Any other questions?
I appreciate you sharing that with us, and it's a little bit off topic, but you brought it up in your testimony, and it's relevant to this committee and this discussion specifically, I do believe. So I thank you for sharing that with the committee.
Thank you, and thank you for your service.
Representative Owsley, did you have another question?
No, Madam Chair, I just had another comment that I wanted to thank I believe Megan was her name, the virtual conferee, for sharing her information about her remote learning experience at her place. I think that was information that was not given a voice in our hearing last week, and I wanted to thank her for taking her time to use her testimony in that manner. Thank
Well,
you.
of course, Representative Owsley. And as you know, we did provide Topeka School District about 20, 30 minutes to talk about remote learning and their data. And we did invite state board members to talk about continuous learning and remote learning as well. So we understand that some kids will excel. They will always excel no matter what circumstances they are placed in. We were focusing on the challenges, which sometimes are often overlooked. Stephanie, I wanted to bring up one thing about special education for those of you that may not be aware of it. Special education funds cannot be provided by the federal government directly to private schools. They are provided to public schools. Public schools must then provide those services to the private school. So I don't know how or what was lapsed between the communication between the public school that you were in, you don't need to respond, affiliated with, or your private school. I will say that also that if you're not familiar with this Special Education Funding Committee members, this was brought up last week on another topic. The school district, let's say your student was going to a private school, the school district does receive funding. They count that child in enrollment. They receive base state aid plus the special education money. Even though the child does not attend the public school, they attend the private school. Let's just use that scenario. But the school district maintains the base state aid, which is approximately $4,600 right now. They then have to provide the average of the special education services to the other private school, and that is required by law. So I just wanted to clarify that generally the school districts are not harmed by providing those services because they are federally mandated to do so. I also would add that private schools, their funding is about 43.6% less than public schools. And I think, Mark, if you come up to the podium really quick, I think in one of your latest blasts or maybe on your website, I think your numbers are that public schools average per pupil expenditures for 2021 are $17,622. Does that sound correct? I think that was off your website.
That sounds a little high, but I will accept that. I won't interrupt you. Continue.
Okay, well, so if it were, that's correct off your website, 17,622, and the private schools average or per pupil funding is 7,694. It would be a reasonable assumption that no, they don't have the funding for every different type of situation. They just don't have the funding. Now, if they receive 43.6% more in funding, I bet you they could handle every type of student, as do the school districts. But I do have a couple questions for you, Mark, if there are no others from the committee, because I know we're probably, well, I'm going to let Representative Penn go first, and I'll just go last. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's very kind. Thank you, Mr. Tallman, for appearing. This is for you, but it's actually Representative Owsley brought up Ms. Hemingway's testimony. And I'm looking at her written, and we heard her oral. She talked about how out there in Shawnee Mission District that she had the kids at the Rising Star Academy. They were very good, bright students, so forth and so on. And there was like this whole of the community, of the school community approach to making sure that these kids had everything they needed. And we're looking at this map that the chairwoman just brought up, 17,622. My question for you is, in Shawnee Mission District and across your clients that you have, is that same approach taken to what this bill is trying to target and alleviate, as we heard from the first conferee, Bishop Wade Moore, low-income students, i.e. underperforming in some of the herring situations that we've heard, is that same attention, is that same drive, is that same energy being applied across Shawnee Mission District to those low-income students and across the rest of your clients in other school districts?
So I want to give you the.
I'll make it succinct. Are they helping black kids the same way that they're helping that crust of society?
What I hear from our members is a desire to help every student succeed. Now, we know there are gaps in performance, unquestionably, and that's something that I think people are continually trying to struggle to figure out, how do you answer that? So I can't speak for every school board because I haven't talked to them all. What I can speak is for our membership. I don't know anyone who runs for a school board that doesn't want the kids in their community to succeed. Do they all have sort of equal maybe knowledge or expertise across every board member, every teacher, every classroom to be where we'd like to be? No, they don't. And that's where we need to go.
Okay, I got you. I'm going to take that as a no. I would think that this bill would give all of those parents that have those struggling students and who want that same type of educational experience for their children, I think it would empower them to do that, to give them that choice. So that's why I'd be supportive of this. Thank you.
May I respond? Is that, and I get that completely. Our concern is only to make sure that we really are providing that to every family, and that those that there isn't room for, there isn't capacity, there isn't the extra things to be there, that they're not going to be disadvantaged by the situation that they're in. That's what it comes down to.
One more. I appreciate it. I can appreciate that, and thank you for that reasonableness in that. But, you know, past being prologue and performance being there. The question was, are they doing it? You could not confirm that. I've not heard any testimony of anyone saying that that is the case, that we are actually seeing performed with the dollars that have been expended. And with that, I give back.
Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Tallman, of course, I know that you're aware that in 2019, Kansas schools lost more Title I funding than any other state based off of our school finance formula block grants. And as such, Shawnee Mission School District lost over $1 million in funding and went from 13 Title I schools down to 8. Are you aware that Rising Star Elementary is one of those schools? But yet their demographics remain the same as a Title I school, that they're no longer able to receive that funding.
I don't know the specifics of every school there. I know that we did lose federal dollars in that area, and that has that's been a problem in some cases. So yes, I won't prolong that.
Representative Owsley for a second time.
I just wanted to make a quick comment that I know in the Shawnee Mission School District, there are buildings that are majority minority. I just wanted to put that out there.
All right, thank you, Representative Owsley. Any other questions from committee? All right, really quick, have some bunch of questions. I will not answer or ask all of those questions for you, but I noticed that you did some comparisons between the EduServe or EdChoice schools versus Kansas schools. But one thing I noticed that you didn't include were the at-risk only, those low income kids, those free and reduced lunch comparisons. That wasn't provided in your testimony, and I did run the numbers for the EdChoice, and if you compare, Kansas ranks lower than the EdChoice on the NAEP for if you were to do the low income, and that wasn't provided, and I think there were some others that I looked at too. So that was kind of, would maybe be a more apples to apples comparison.
If I may, Madam Chair,
Yes.
in the more legible document that I will send you, when we look at these state comparisons, we have 15 different measures. Within the NAEP, because that's the only one, well, no, that isn't the only one, that we give you results for all students, low income and non-low income. And I would concur, on the NAEP, in some areas, we don't do as well. We are below in that case. We think it's also important to look at other measures, which in some cases don't have that breakdown. So I acknowledge that's critical, but if you, for example, look at graduation rate, which is one of our factors, we tend to do well, not better than all states in comparison, better than many.
And that's a great point on the graduation rate, because it looks like you picked about 12 of the 15 student success measurements and compared those. But wouldn't you say that graduation rate is highly subjective depending on what state, what district, what kind of standards are set?
It is, yes, there's some subjectivity to it. I would also say that NAEP is limited by the fact that if your particular state standards may be more closely aligned with what NAEP says we're going to test it this year, that can potentially also be a factor. I think there's strengths and limitations for every one of these.
Okay, so it was just an interesting parallel that was provided, interesting statistics that were provided. I wanted to provide some Kansas ones really quick as we close up this. But one of the things that we noticed was that at our 100+ private schools that are qualified for the tax credit scholarship program, if you take and you examine those and how they perform and you compare it to the free and reduced lunch students in Kansas, the free and reduced lunch students in Kansas on both math and ELA are over 40% in the level 1. That means that over 40% of, and actually the number is higher if you combine levels 1 and 2, which would not be at grade level. So we're at a very crossroad in Kansas when our free and reduced lunch students are not performing where they should be, and they're not graduating where they should be because they're not at grade level. And what we found in their private school counterparts is that that number is substantially better. And we'll provide that data for the committee for anybody that might like that, or as time allows in the future. Yes, you may have the final word, actually.
So what I tried to do in response to that is on, I think, the last 2 pages of my testimony, where I give you the actual numbers and a chart. And what I've tried to do there, and this is a little different than you've looked at, what we did was take the percent of students that are in the top 2. So we're looking at not those below, but those who are sort of at college and career ready. We could do it the other way. And if you simply look at the graph, what it shows is the school districts with less than 25% of low-income students, and then compared to our private systems, all of which are less than 25%. And you can see in those cases, the results for all kids, low-income kids, African-American and Hispanics are fairly similar. Now, if you compare private schools to the state average or the districts with 75% poverty, they're much better, but they have very different populations. And that's the reason I wanted to share this. Private school performance, if you look at public schools with similar demographics, is not significantly different in our opinion. Yes, it is better if you're comparing to high poverty schools, but low poverty public schools do better than high poverty. And our reason for feeling this is high poverty schools have a much deeper concentration of special needs kids that's very difficult for the district to overcome. Just as we see here that private schools also have a significant gap between their regular kids and their low-income kids. Doesn't mean they're failing, it means they're facing the same troubles we all are. How do we deal with kids primarily because they bring to school problems or background that it's very difficult for the school to overcome? And that's a challenge whether you're in the public system or the private system.
Well, I said you were going to have the last word, and there's tons of data out there, more to be discussed, the committee, but I'm going to just leave it with one final thought. We need all hands on deck in education in Kansas. Wherever our children can succeed, we should be encouraging that and not denying them the opportunity. Our kids are all very unique, and we want them all to succeed. So with that, committee, I don't think I missed anybody for the opponent oral testimony. No? Okay. And if you notice, there is a long list of opponent written testimony. I encourage you to take time and read over that maybe tonight if you haven't already. With that, I officially close the hearing on HB 2119. There's no COVID funding or anything else to do, so we are adjourned. Have a good evening.